Hello, everyone. Welcome. I hope everyone's doing well today. There seems to be some issues with GoToWebinar where we're not able to share our webcams right now, and so I do apologize for that. We're going to try and figure out if we can address that. But really, who needs to see us talking? We're going to guide through this conversation. So my name is Casey Schmaliker. I am simply facilitating this and asking questions. The two real heavyweights here are Samantha Feinman and Evan Flamenbaum. So Dr. Flamenbaum is joining us from Academics West and Therapy West. He is the co-founder, head of school over there. They're really one of the only mental health certified schools within New York City. And so he lives with the intersection of what we're discussing today, about where does the executive functioning skills and mental health intersect. Samantha Feinman, the director of New Frontiers in Learning, New Frontiers Executive Functioning Coaching. She has worked on executive functioning skills. She started off at the college level over at Pace University, and now has expanded New Frontiers to service individuals as low as 5th grade, sometimes even a little younger, all the way up through the lifespan. So today's conversation is really going to be centered on these different perspectives of how they interact. So most of the people, when you are speaking with professionals from these different realms, really are understanding that there's a little bit of almost a chicken and an egg situation of what is impacting the other. I do see Sam is having some difficulty with her mic. Sam, just if you could figure out that mic. If not, you can join as an attendee. And then I'll be able to give you access to turn on the microphone. So while Sam is figuring that piece out, I did want to start, Evan, just like getting this conversation started about how does mental health, and maybe specifically with anxiety, how is that impacting executive functions? What happens to, even if we talk about a quote unquote neurotypical individual, what is the impact?
Sure. Thank you very much. I hope everybody listening walks away with some interesting ideas and even some tools. So first of all, it's pretty much axiomatic that anybody with a psychiatric condition, a major mental health diagnosis, has some executive functioning issues. But let's just talk about people in general. It is part of the human condition to be anxious. And even if you look at how we diagnose people with anxiety, one of the things is poor attention control. That's like one of the categories, one of the criteria for diagnosis. So if you think about it this way, when people get anxious, it's almost like they're starting to hold more objects in their head. And it becomes harder to focus on things. We talk a lot in executive function about working memory, which is our short-term memory. So we can only think about it, the metaphor is your hands. You can only hold so many objects in your hand. You add one more and all of a sudden everything falls out. It's the same thing with anxiety and executive functioning. We have only a certain amount of space that we can allow anxiety and be able to focus our attention, get things done. You add one extra thing to your hands, or in this case, your sort of anxiety space, all of a sudden you can't pay attention, you can't get things done. So most mental health folks really don't have any appreciation of the necessity of anxiety, of executive functioning. And education and therapy, let's just say, they're one and the same. They're not mutually exclusive. We're teaching people to do things, and if they don't get traction, they're not going to learn. So if I'm doing therapy with somebody and they don't have adequate executive functioning, they will not have the traction to learn those skills, internalize them, and generalize them, which means using them in other spaces and places. So I see no difference in education in psychology in terms of treatment. It's teaching people how to do things. To learn, you need good executive functioning. So that's sort of the bridge between me and Samantha, is we're kind of doing the same things, maybe from different perspectives, but you need a lot of the same skills.
And so with that, Sam, welcome.
Hello.
What do you think, like, so on that angle, coming in, some mental health issues, and then identifying some of those executive functions that might be contributing to that. Now, from your perspective, Sam, people are coming in with some of these executive functioning challenges. How do you see that impacting the mental health, or even just commenting on the reverse end of when you get a client, a student that you're working with, how do you kind of separate that out of where does the mental health end and where do the executive dysfunctions begin?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that sometimes, the clients that we work with, they've been struggling with executive function difficulties for years, and it definitely impacts how they perceive learning and how they feel about learning. And so often we see executive function deficits going hand in hand with anxiety. So sometimes we're wondering, what comes first, the executive function weaknesses or the anxiety? And I really think they, like Evan was saying, they interplay with each other, and that our clients, when they have executive function weakness, they don't necessarily, you can't see it, they don't wear it. And it's a lack of internal processes and internal structures that sometimes they don't even know that they don't have. And they perceive the rest of the world as being able to do things that they can't do. And it causes them anxiety, it causes them stress, it causes them to wonder, why can't they do things that other people can do? And we start to see them fall into that fixed mindset. I'm stupid, I just can't do it, everybody else is better at it, and I'm not. And so, when we come from the perspective of developing executive function skills, we're helping to show that, it's the internal structures that you're lacking that can be developed through practice that will then help you to be a successful learner. So you can get out of that negative cycle of learned helplessness by developing strategies to do better in school. And that's what the coaching is all about, is getting them from thinking that they can't do something to changing their behaviors and helping them set up structure and routine, so that they can see that when I do these things, use this strategy, follow this protocol, then that leads to doing better in school, and doing better in school leads to feeling better, having a more positive self-concept. So, working on those executive function skills, it's non-therapeutic from the perspective we come from, but I think it definitely goes hand in hand so often with the stress and the anxiety and the pressures that they're feeling when they don't perform well.
Awesome. So,
hey, Casey, can I add to that?
Jump right in.
That was such a great foundation. So in psychology, we talk about this concept called learned helplessness. And a good metaphor I once heard was, baby elephants who are really cute. They teach them to walk in a circle. They have a chain on their leg, and it's like a stake in the ground. They have to walk in a circle. When they're a 2,000-pound behemoth, a huge elephant, they could pluck out that chain. It's like a toothpick in the ground, but they don't. They've learned to be helpless. And people with a lot of executive dysfunction, students we see who, what Samantha, I'm just putting in the psychological or cognitive behavioral terms, they develop a core belief or schema that they can't do things. And so a lot of the work I do, and a lot of the work Samantha does, and a lot of work we have to do collaboratively to generalize, because multiple people have to kind of help people, is teaching people how to give that chain a tug. How can I break this almost self-fulfilling prophecy that I can't do things? And learned helplessness, all that research came about because that's how we understood the process behind depression. So people who are extremely depressed have a lot of cognitive rigidity. They have poor executive functioning. I mean, all these things go together. If you have poor executive functioning, you have trouble with sustaining friendships. That takes a lot of executive control, a lot of social reciprocity. So and it's chicken and the egg. They all sort of mutually reinforce each other. But that's kind of exactly kind of from through the clinical lens, what Samantha is saying, how we look at the same kids, basically doing the same thing, but just from a different kind of, I guess, theoretical perspective.
And I think that's great. I'm actually, just quickly for all the participants, I'm just launching a poll so that we get a better understanding of the population makeup of who's here. But while that's going out, so I had Samantha once teach me about this dude named Bronfenbrenner and his ecological systems theory, and about how important it is for these different realms to interact with one another. So I'd love first I'd like to start with Sam about the benefits you see of having a mental health support as a teammate in working with individuals. And then we'll jump over to Evan because Dr. Flamenbaum, you have this on both ends. You do have Academics West and Therapy West. So first, Sam, what do you see as those benefits of the real camaraderie in supporting clients with mental health practitioners? And then we'll jump over to Dr. Flamenbaum.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, the work complements each other. It's different, but it helps the clients that we work with to look at the big picture and put all of their systems and supports in place, and they're working harmoniously. So, we're not working on therapeutic coping, but we certainly can encourage our clients to use the coping strategies that they're working on with their therapists when we're doing a session, and vice versa. We've had therapists that we collaborate with, so we'll talk about what strategies they're working on and what we're working on, so that again, sometimes when our clients hit an obstacle because of something having to do with their executive function skills. So for instance, we have a student that needs to write a paper and she doesn't know how to start that paper. Well, that's an executive function thing that we're working on, but that leads to stress and anxiety, and she needs to learn what she needs to do in that scenario to both deal with the stress and anxiety, but also how to start that paper. So working collaboratively with the therapeutic team is really important, because we're able to complement each other's work and reinforce each other's work, and come from a front for the family, so that everybody's on the same page and everybody's working harmoniously. That's an actual example that that we had one time, that we had a client that needed to write a paper, and she didn't know how to start it because of the way the directions were written. So on our end, we were teaching her how to separate important versus irrelevant information when you're comprehending how you're going to write the paper based on how the directions were written. And her therapist was working on, what do you do in a scenario when you're feeling like you don't know how to get yourself to the next step. And so it worked really well, because we were working on the non-therapeutic nitty-gritty of what she had to get done, and developing systems for those things. And then her overall health and well-being and mental health was being complemented with her therapist, and it works very harmoniously.
And I think that's a perfect segue. So over to you, Dr. Flamenbaum. I want to just run with that example of running a paper. I've coached, and I know that this is an exact question I've come up with as a coach without the mental health background. So Sam posed it as the anxiety stemming from not being able to start the paper. And that's a little bit of an assumption, because I know sometimes students have anxiety about even getting started, anxiety of perfectionism coming out. What if what I write is bad? And so that's a perfect example of how do we know, is this more of a mental health cause, or is this more of an executive functioning cause? And even further, can you really know, and should that inform how we go about supporting that individual?
Right. Again, my platform has always been that executive functioning is the bridge between like the clinical world and the educational world, but they're one and the same. meaning I think a lot of the work that therapists do and teachers do with executive functioning kind of looks the same. So I'll give you an example of both directions. How's that? So somebody has test anxiety, they freeze. So they have a sympathetic response of the nervous system. Danger, I freeze. Now I might be working with a patient on some paced breathing or some grounding exercises. Okay, I can call Samantha and say, these are really simple. You can work on them as well. But Samantha can also call me up and say, hey, I got some feedback for you about how you're conducting your sessions from a executive functioning, or let's call it learning style point of view. She's going to tell me, hey, buddy, you keep on doing cognitive behavioral therapy with this kid and giving him lots of worksheets, and it's complicated and he's filling stuff out. This is a really auditory kid that doesn't work for her. You need to change, you need to be aware of their learning style in the work you do. So we sort of mutually inform each other in all the stuff we're doing. And anxiety is kind of the common denominator that even the what's going on in social media these days, and I'm sorry, just on the regular media, is very it's a very difficult time. There's a lot of research coming out now that's showing media violence is related to various domains of executive dysfunction. The bottom line is, for this stuff to work, we need to I need to work with a kid, and then Samantha needs to work with a kid. We need to be doing the same things aligned, even if we sort of use some different tools and perspectives, so they can generalize. Because they could do well in my office, but not well with her, or vice versa. So we need to be kind of on the same page about how we're approaching things. When I find practitioners are not having this conversation about how we're kind of trying to approach the same issue using our own sort of skill set, that becomes a big problem, because I might be saying to a kid, here's how I want you to attack writing this paragraph, and then you can have another professional educator doing it differently. You already have somebody with executive dysfunction. Now they're getting more confused, and our influence becomes confounding more than constructive.
And so normally, I did forget to mention this because of, oh, perfect. I forgot to mention at the beginning of this webinar, because of the technical difficulties, you guys can submit questions throughout this. There's a question box. We will give access to people towards the end if they would like to speak, to ask questions, if they'd rather to just do it over the microphone. So one of the questions that just came up is, I have students who know what to do to get organized, but refuse to do it. And so what works in this situation? So first, Sam, I want to see what perspectives you could add there, and then we'll jump over to Dr. Feinman.
Great question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. And organizational skills are very multifaceted. We first have to look at what is the expectation of organization? Is it about organizing your environment? Is it about organizing your materials? Is it organizing your ideas? Is it all of those things? So kind of what dimension of organization are we talking about? And when individuals can't keep up with their organizational demands, they tend to become very anxious. They tend to become very overwhelmed, and they tend to become paralyzed from moving themselves forward towards the goal of being organized. So the first thing I would look at is what our expectation is in terms of a goal for organization, realistic and broken down for small enough for the student to be able to do on their own. If they can't do it on their own, they're going to freeze and be paralyzed and not be able to move themselves forward. So they may need a little support. Do they know what that do they know what the end product looks like? So, one of the organization is one of those concepts that's very abstract. So when we tell students get organized, are we giving them a model of what that's supposed to look like? Are we doing it with them? Are we showing them the value in doing it and what it leads to? And are they feeling that a sense of value? Because to get their buy-in and their motivation, they need to have the desire and the motivation to want to do it. And so if they don't have that desire and motivation, maybe whatever system you're trying to teach is not working for them, or it's not broken down farther enough. So you have to really look at and understand, like, exactly what is your expectation, and do they understand what your expectation is in a very concrete way?
And just a little bit further before we jump over to Dr. Flemingbaum, Sam, what the premise of how to get organized, is it important that there is a right way to get organized? Like, is there an answer for that, or is it really important about, and you talked about buy-in. I guess it's almost like the ends. What's more important, the means of getting there or the ends of getting there? Because everyone's organization would look different. So when we say they know how to get organized, what method of organization? Is it ours or is it theirs?
It's 100% theirs. I know a lot of people who have very different systems of organization than I do, and it works for them. So it's all about what works for the student, what works for the client, and having the foundational understanding of what the purpose in organization is. And the purpose in organization is so that you can find information as efficiently as possible. And so if it's about keeping a desk organized, well, if their desk is disorganized, but they know where everything is that really an organizational issue? I would debate not. Just because something works for one person doesn't mean it works for somebody else.
My favorite is the messy backpack. It's like, well, it might bother parents, but is it impacting the student? And
Right.
we always assume it does, but it doesn't always. It's interesting. So Dr. Feinman, just to repeat the question, the students who know what to do to get organized, but they refuse to do it.
Oh man, that's my favorite situation. So, and there's a lot of ways to look at this, and I think you'll walk away from my comments thinking, wow, no, I never heard anybody talk to a kid like this. So one of the things my premise is this: people do well if they can. Kids do well if they can. If they can't, it's not will, it's skill. So number one, it's a skill deficit. Assume that it makes sense. The other thing is kids, young, I'm even talking up to college, who have executive dysfunction that's impacting them. They all share the same thing 24/7, the avoidance of humiliation. So start there. Because like Sam said earlier on, you got a lot of people that are really smart, but they can't show they're smart. I understand what's happening, but my input's good, my output is bad. I can't do it in the right way, the right order, the right time. And so that's very dissonant, to be smart and not be able to kind of like do what other people are doing around you. So psychology does give us some kind of cool tricks with kids that I've used over the years. One of them, I can't get into them deeply now. One of them is motivational interviewing, which is kind of creating change talk out of that person's mouth. And it's a little Jedi-ish, but it really works. And the other thing I use is solution-focused therapy, which is kind of like, if it works, do more of it. If it don't, do less. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And you can even do things like, one of the staples of solution-focused therapy is the miracle question. Any intake I do with a kid with executive functioning issues, I say to them, hey, Casey, let's say you went to sleep tonight, and while you're sleeping, a big miracle happened, and you woke up tomorrow morning, and everything was perfect. And you're like, oh man, I got to class on time. I did well on the test. I didn't have that stomach ache. People were nice to me. I took notes that I understood, all that stuff. All of a sudden, your intrinsic motivation builds and you start experiencing a possible future. It has single-handedly transformed motivation for many kids I've worked with. And the other crux of this, where again, teachers and clinicians completely overlap and can do together, is goal setting. Helping people without goals is not helping them. You have to have a target and a goal. But goal setting is easy. If it was, is hard. Achieving goals is hard. Setting them is easy. New Year's rolls around every day, and people don't all go to the gym or stop smoking, etc. It's hard. The missing ingredients tend to be objectives. The what is easy. The how is harder. The objectives are the how. And then there's the third part, which is the what's in it for me piece, the WIFM, I usually say to kids, the intrinsic motivation. I'm sitting next to this nice woman, Samantha. she wants me to try this technique. What's in it for me? Why do I want to? And that opens up a lot of space for people wanting to increase their own motivation. They're so used to external motivation. Do it to get an A. Do it because your parents want you to do it. Do it, because you want to go to Harvard. Do it because you don't want to get made fun of. But if you can make that intrinsic, it's really important. And one time, even using a reframe, just even the word organization is loaded. Hey, let's get organized. A lot of kids have been yelled at. You could sit with a 22-year-old. They've been yelled at for 15 years about getting organized. And sometimes I say, look, I don't want to talk about organization. I want to talk about feeling better. And just the reframe change. This is cognitive behavioral therapy in a nutshell. Just changing the cognition. All of a sudden, somebody starts feeling better, and then their behavior changes. They're like, okay, Samantha, I'm going to do what you're telling me to. So again, working with the teacher and the clinician to start playing around with some of these reframes, working on goal setting, all those things we share professionally. Those are sort of in everybody's wheelhouse to do collectively.
There's just two things I really want to highlight there that I just love what you say. One, envisioning what success looks like. It's abstract, and the populations with either mental health struggles or executive functioning difficulties, they're in the here and now, and it's hard to envision what success might look like. It's hard to see that motivation of why would I do that, and I think that's so important. And then that other aspect of, and I always like saying this to people, organization is boring. Prioritization is boring. Who wants to talk about that? That's not accessible. It's not meaningful. And I think that's so important, of finding other access points to work on these things that we know and we have labeled as problematic areas, but what is a more tangible phrasing? And so to move on to another question. So how do you understand real skill with social media navigating in comparison to ability to learn academic skills? So if I do not translate this, and please do correct me, but so navigating social media, I believe here, might be a useful skill. There's so many fields in this that it can develop over time. You can create a career out of this, but how can you take that mastery of that type of skill, social media, and then try to manifest that within more applicable things for students? So a student can know, and we'll start with you, Sam, but like a student can know every aspect of a social media website and they can navigate that whole thing. I know, like Wikipedia, being able to bounce around and access all of that information is so tangible. Well, why isn't there always a correspondence within the academic realm and the academic skills?
Well, I think you kind of alluded to it there, right? It's academics could be boring, they could be hard, they could be not motivating, they could be the things that the clients don't necessarily want to work on, whereas social media gives them a lot more positive feedback immediately. And so with the academics, you know, we have to, it's all about prioritization and understanding that, you know, going back to that concept of goal setting, getting to the end of a goal, a long-term goal planning can be very tedious to people that live in the here and now. And a lot of times when you have executive function deficits, you're constantly living in the here and now. You're not necessarily looking at the big picture and seeing what you need to do in order to get to the end, into the end zone. So, you know, academics is many times set up that way, and without long-term and short-term planning, it's very hard for you know, individuals with executive function weakness to see the light at the end of the tunnel. They either get, you know, kind of caught up in the weeds of all of the nitty-gritty and don't see the end goal, or if they just see the end goal and they don't see the steps to get there, they think it's insurmountable and it's hard for them to get to the end zone. When you have something like social media, it's instant gratification. It's very visual, it's very concrete, and it's very motivating, especially to you know, the generations of kids that are growing up living and breathing it all day, every day.
The first part of your answer sounds like why I dropped out of being an engineer the first day of college and I switched to government and law. It just wasn't interesting, and so my executive functions appeared to be impaired by that. And I'd love to hear, Dr. Flamenbaum, just a little bit of social media obsession or addiction, if we want to call it that, and that mental health impact that social media can have. How is that impacting executive functions? How is that, from your work, how are you seeing that manifest with students about what Sam started hinting at of this instant gratification and the hurdles that that creates with our developing youth currently?
So I am the father of 2 teenagers, and I grew up in a time where social didn't have the word media next to it. So, and you know, I think like everything we want to look at, there's an adaptive side and then there's a maladaptive side. And I think on the adaptive side of things, being really good at social media navigation is a skill. It's something you can feel mastery about. Parents always say to us, my kid isn't motivated. Is he or she motivated to play Xbox or get on Instagram? Yeah. So it is a motivating experience that takes no internal drive. People like it. It's a great way to find things, find information. It's a great way to make things interesting. However, obviously, on the downside, the social media world is a very selective representation of life. And if you're already executive functioning correlates highly to anxiety, depression, social withdrawal, negative self-concept, starting to globally rate yourself. And I think that spending too much time in social media for people already having some of those factors, at play really can be a very detrimental place. But learning can and should be fun. If we can sort of, again, it's like we have to teach people things. I taught my kids how to go to the bathroom, how to walk, how to talk, how to cross the street. I'm also trying to get them to use social media in a way that is adaptive and fun, but doesn't make them feel bad. I think that all of us have to do that. And what was I lost my train of thought. And learning should be fun. The goal of a teacher is to enroll a student. That means I always tell kids, it's not boring. You find it boring. How are you going to find it interesting? So I was a kid with raging ADHD, but I realized one of the adaptive parts of that, I could make anything fun and interesting. So teaching people how to gamify boring things, how to make them interesting, even a little bit. All right, you have a paper to write? Let's pick a topic that you're interested in. Maybe you want to write about social media. So I think there's a lot of ways. I think we have a real responsibility in teaching people, whether in therapy or doing true educational work, that there are ways that you can control what's happening more than you realize to make things more interesting, which leads to better motivation, better well-being, better engagement.
That last part resonates with me so much, Evan. Kids need to be taught how to take agency and take control of topics. You get to choose your topic, make it fun. And anytime I've done that with anyone that I've worked with, they have like an aha moment of, wait, I can actually write about whatever I want. Like they're not joking. And it's just such a change in perspective. And if you didn't get to it, I was going to throw in my 2 cents, and it sounds like I'm throwing in my 2 cents anyway.
I think we've both been there, yes.
Yep. And yeah, just to like add on to that, like that whole idea of how can we use Wikipedia and how you love going into Wikipedia holes to enhance our education. So here's another question. It's a little bit loaded, and we can read into it a little bit, and I'm going to want to start with Dr. Flamenbaum. So this is an individual who works in a foster group setting with children. And so there's a lot that comes with this from the mental health angle. What's one concrete skill to help assist in their functioning? And so I'm going to just expand that specifically towards, I'm sure there's these impacts to executive functions. And so what is something that they can really work on in trying to help this professional and trying to support this foster group with children, what might be the first entry point that you would recommend to help increase and see the most widespread?
Well, I mean, in terms of daily functioning, school functioning,
so let's start with daily functioning, like, and maybe even if you maybe focus just on that motivation piece of trying to do anything and like being motivated to work on yourself.
Right. I think, look, one of the things that is so fundamental, I always come back to, and a lot of this comes out of sports psychology, by the way, and some kids just even like to hear that. They're like, oh, that's cool, athletes do this. So who's the best at setting goals? Athletes. They're always enhancing performance, you know. So teaching kids how to set goals, not my goals, not their parents' goals or their foster parent, their goals. First of all, they're usually not even asked. It gives them a sense of agency and ownership just to be asked about their goals. Hey, what would you like to see? Set some goals. What would you like to see different about your life or better? It could be school, so whatever it is, you can learn a lot. And I start there, and then again, I teach them the objectives, which is like, okay, we got the what. It has to be reasonable and measurable. They can't be like, I want to be happier. Well, what does that mean? I want to, you know, you can't say I want to do better at math. I want to get a B+ in math. So you teach them how to set the goal, the objectives, the how, which is almost like the stairs on the staircase. And then the what's in it for me piece, the intrinsic motivation piece, which is the internal factor. Everybody has their own, that's everybody's own special world that they can build on. And teaching kids how to goal set really ultimately gets them in a direction. They need to feel hope. Hope is one of the most predictive indicators of future functioning because you see a possible future. So goal setting, intrinsic motivation, all those things that come out of positive psychology and sports psychology, which really kind of one and the same in a lot of ways. That's where I start, because when people start experiencing success, it breeds more success, which is really what motivation doesn't fall out of the sky. Motivation comes from momentum. Oh, I did a little bit, I'll do a little bit more. And then all of a sudden people have developed habit formation, goal setting, and increasing that locus of control and overall sense of agency is an invaluable gift, especially for people living in a difficult situation that at its baseline creates a lot of duress.
And that's great. Sam, I'll bring that question a little bit further. Goal setting and achieving goals is one thing. And I know through my work with executive functioning coaching, sometimes individuals, even when they achieve goals, aren't making connections from there. And so just what's been your approach to make sure that these goals have all of those positive effects that Dr. Flamenbaum just talked about? And just why is that so essential? Because I think everyone just assumes that people understand when a goal is achieved, where that stemmed from. Like, do you get what I'm getting at, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it is spot on. And when you asked the question, the one thing that was just going on in my mind was goal setting. It is the number one essential skill that we need to many times teach clients, and that it's the foundation. It's where we start. You know, with it, so sometimes they don't make the connection. I think sometimes it's not their goals. Sometimes we don't gather the right amount of information to help them to create the most informed goals. Sometimes we don't follow through with the process. You know, a goal is nothing more than a vision, but if you don't take the steps to achieve that goal and provide the right level of support and remediation to get to the end goal, then the goal is meaningless. So, you know, through the whole goal setting process, you start to help the clients to see, rather than what is just right in front of them, but the bigger picture, and how everything that happens and occurs informs where you're going towards that goal. And, you know, and to create good goals, you need to gather a lot of really good information about how your clients are spending their leisure time, what are their talents, what are their strengths, what are their needs, what do they want to get better at. You identify their strengths and weaknesses, and it helps them to create a picture of how they see their life in the future based on where they want to go. And that can, in and of itself, like Dr. Flamenbaum was saying, can really help to develop that intrinsic motivation and that drive that is necessary to move yourself forward. But from there, you have to, help to identify, and this is where the coaching comes in, identifying those steps towards achieving the long-term goal. You're not just going to get there, but what do you need to do to get there? That's when you start making those connections, and that has to be done explicitly. So if the connections aren't being made, it's because it's not explicitly being taught. These are things that don't automatically necessarily happen. And then also discussing the obstacles in achieving those long-term goals and identifying how you're going to circle back and remediate the skills and the strategy and incorporate the strategies that are necessary to achieve those goals. When all of those things are interweaved and connected and the clients can see the bigger picture, they automatically start developing and seeing the interconnectedness of it, because you're taking those systems that we internalize and happen almost automatically for us, and you're externalizing them for the client so they can say, oh, I see. In order for me to get there, I need to do this and this and this and this, and it develops frustration tolerance, and they start to develop persistence and see that it's not going to happen overnight, but every step I get towards it is going to help me go in the right direction. And I guess, not to go on a tangent, but that's another big piece of it also, is that helping them to develop that positive self-talk. We don't know what's going on inside their heads. And so developing that language and externalizing that language of, I can do this. It's going to be hard, but not, things are difficult if you want to make progress. Sometimes things get disruptive, but then when you work on them, they work themselves out. So helping them to develop that positive self-talk can also be very advantageous in making those connections that if I do this, then it will eventually lead to this.
And I'll just add in one other thing there. Sometimes a simple question, it might come across as infantilizing, but sometimes it's very important. How did that make you feel? That connection to, I achieved that goal and that made me feel good. Sometimes that's really important because that connection isn't being made. By doing X, it led to Y. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, that's such an important point that I kind of made my own name for it. And that is so overlooked. I call it the amygdala moment, which is the part of our brain that processes emotions. People remember things that made them feel something. So another overlap between good academic coaching and good therapy, again, we're all teachers teaching people skills at the end of the day, is you need, if I'm doing therapy with somebody or executive function coaching, if they don't walk away having some sort of corrective experience, feeling something, I've not done my job. So there is a organization called Quantum Learning. Sam, I don't know if you know it. They do a lot of executive functioning work. They do a summer camp, 10 days, and their research indicated the outcome measures that even though it was only 10 days, the rest of the school year, these kids sustained and generalized their gains. And people are like, what the hell? How could that happen? What all the research started pointing at is because they go to this camp and have like the best time in the world. I've been there, I've seen it. It's like nothing you've ever imagined. They're having such a strong amygdala experience, it stays. It becomes neurobiologically ingrained. So that is no small thing. So most kids will remember, just even if it's like, you know what, again, you always want to sort of praise effort more than ability from the research on intrinsic motivation. But when people just hear you say, wow, that is so amazing how hard you worked at that, you connected these dots, you did something you couldn't do before, and they feel something, huge part of learning. And just another comment just on when Samantha's talking about externalizing language, in the CBT world, we talk a lot about reframing cognitions. And a lot of the kids we're talking about with executive function are black and white. They're sort of dichotomous learners. There's a lot of rigidity. So getting them to restate things as a preference oh man, I should have done well in this. Well, I prefer to do well in it. This teacher should have done this. Well, it's the preference piece, creating some psychological flexibility. And the other phrase that I often use a lot with kids who are struggling learners, who are like cognitively rigid, they either think you either fail or you're good at it, is I'm in the process of learning. What do you do? I'm in the process of learning. It allows a space for development. You're not either good or bad or an expert or a failure. You're in the process, giving them the room to grow and develop. So important. Who can do that? People that are scaffolding them, that they trust next to them, and parents, of course.
And so I just wanted to give two very concrete examples to any parents here, and then also professionals who may benefit. Outlining an essay. How do we connect that to, like, we set a goal, we're going to outline an essay. The real goal is to spend less time writing your essay and to have it be more organized. And what I've done as a coach is very explicitly said, we're going to time the entire process now. Doesn't it feel good that you got the essay done in 3 hours instead of 6? It's a very concrete reasoning to justify using that strategy again in the future. And I've done the same exact thing with, let's try and get all our homework done before dinner. You can play video games after dinner then and not worry about it. And then when a student has done that, how did that feel to not have to worry about your homework after 7 p.m.? That is that connection to, you set these goals, but we have to sometimes explicitly tie it back to, why did we even set this goal in the first place, and what's the benefit of it?
Right.
So just for time's sake, there are 2 more questions. We'll try to get to both of them. This first one's going to go over to Dr. Flamenbaum. So for emerging adults, how do you account for the differences around identity, background, sexual orientation, and gender? So some of these students are really navigating hard paths with all of these different things going on. So how do you account for these general aspects of identity and how that impacts individuals? And do you see that, and this is where I'm adding to the initial question, but do you see that being rooted in more of a mental health crisis, like an identity crisis manifesting within mental health aspects, or do you see some other avenues of entryways to address these problems or these difficulties?
No, this is really important stuff. One of the things, and again, it's not that a lot of educators learn this well. You have to know development, child and adult development, and really the guy that we all like to look at generally is Erik Erikson. And the age you're talking about, he defines the developmental task. And so the goal is to get through this developmental task to go to the next stage, right? And people develop a lot of mental health issues when they don't. And the poles of it, and it's a polarized kind of thing that you have to reconcile, is identity development versus role confusion. Identity development basically focuses on teens through the early 20s. Who am I? What am I good at? What do I want to do? When you are in a safe, nurturing, supportive environment that you have sort of generally secure attachment with yourself and others, you are going to go in, and that is so the crisis is a normal developmental process. When people get stuck too far in a pole, either the identity pole of I am so this that I can't be anything else, that's a problem we see, the rigidity of being frozen in an identity concept, or on the other side, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know my sexuality. I don't know what I like. I don't know how to make myself feel good or what I want to do. So that's always in the back of my mind, is helping people reconcile identity versus role confusion. Otherwise, they get stuck, and you can meet people 30s, 40s, 50s who are still combating the developmental kind of tasks that they did not figure out, many years prior. So, and you can see why all the things you just talked about might emerge out of the role confusion.
And I think just a little bit further also, it's hard to set genuine goals for yourself if you have an identity crisis, because internally you're prioritizing, maybe subconsciously, that you're not living your identity. And so it's very hard to set all of these other goals because they may seem superficial in comparison to that. And so one last question, and then we'll wrap up for the day. We'll start, this is from a therapeutic lens, but we'll start with Sam and then we'll finish the conversation with Dr. Flamenbaum. So the question is in regards to therapy. As a therapist, how can you set rewards to non-motivated patients? But Sam, if you could comment on the non-motivated client that's struggling with executive functioning, how would you use rewards as a tool? And what might be an example of a reward, if you would use them, that you would consider when supporting a client?
So, I think motivation is, something that we have to kind of look at from a different perspective than we traditionally look at it. An unmotivated client could look like they don't want to do something, they don't care, they're avoiding things, they're passive, I don't know, I don't care. And we have to look at first and foremost how we're interpreting that behavior, because how we interpret that behavior is very different than why it's being displayed in reality. So if we have to really kind of just dive deeper into why is this person demonstrating a lack of motivation? Because all of the rewards in the world will not make a difference if we don't know the underlying cause of why the client is unmotivated. So just some factors that may affect motivation are things like a level of stamina. So sometimes when the goal that they're supposed to achieve is too far away, they go through this honeymoon phase of being motivated to do something, but then they burn out quick because there's no gratification. And so in situations like that, we need to build in some sort of motivating factors, externalized motivation. And external motivations are intangible rewards are from the outside, and they vary from context to context, and may be rewarding one day and not the other. And so coming up with external rewards is a very personalized process that the therapist and the client need to work out and find out exactly what is externally rewarding. But again, that motivation, why is that client demonstrating unmotivated behaviors? Is it this lack of being able to get to the finish line? Is it increased levels of stress and anxiety? Is it poor self-confidence? Is it a lack of coping strategies? Is it mental health factors? And so, so sometimes you just need to work on emotional readiness to drive motivation. Sometimes motivation can be low because you don't get enough sleep or you're not getting enough exercise. I think in today's day and age, when we're all living through this pandemic, we're seeing that we have a lack in structure and routine. We all have had probably less daily exercise or daily movement, maybe an unhealthy diet as compared to normal, less sleep or more sleep. And all of these things can set the stage for motivation. So, you want to look at all different factors, not just how can I reward somebody, but what is causing that lack of motivation in the first place? What is the underlying root cause of no motivation?
So it sounded like you're talking a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs there. For anyone checking out just that concept of you need certain needs met before you can start building up that stuff. So for final word here, we might have like a minute for a final question, but Dr. Flamenbaum, just that idea about your experience with creating rewards for, and specifically now through a therapeutic lens to non-motivated patients. You've talked a lot about intrinsic motivation, but do you ever see a role for maybe extrinsic motivators, external rewards? I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I'm a behaviorist at heart, and like Samantha said, it's first of all, step one is I don't believe in unmotivated people, especially young people. They're just not always motivated to do what we want them to do. So I have a 17-year-old. He's motivated to walk the dog. He's motivated to play Xbox. So I think we have to remember that there's no. I try to think of there's no such thing as an unmotivated person. But in psychology, in behaviorism specifically, we look at things based on the antecedent. What is that thing that happens beforehand that makes something else happen? Antecedent behavior, then there's the consequence, the result. So what is it? Is it hey, Casey, I noticed that you're having trouble getting started on something, feeling unmotivated. And we start exploring well, you're like, yeah, I do better in the morning. That's an antecedent. Oh, I do better when I exercise. That's an antecedent. Oh, I do better when I get something done and then I schedule a pleasant event activity. It makes my mood better. So we always look at the antecedent. And then to go back to what Samantha said, you also have to look at what is the functional purpose of why this person may not be doing something. And usually it does serve. I don't know how to do it. I'm avoiding feeling ashamed or frustrated. We call that negative reinforcement. I'm doing something to remove a negative stimulus, which is like feeling crappy. I do think external and internal motivation can go hand in hand. I see a lot of people, you got to start external, some sort of, whether it's, food, money, whatever that tangible external thing is, could even be just a person praising you. That sometimes I find you need that. That's an accommodation. And then the intervention part, the change part comes when something starts happening, and then the internal part kicks in. So they really can go hand in hand. They're not mutually exclusive. They can really work together very effectively. But like you said about the kids you worked with, Casey, I will even say to kids something like, working on time management, hey, what would you do if you had another hour free a day? And they're like, oh, wow. And I learned over time to say that's legal, because I got some interesting responses. And most of, number one, teenager, I want to sleep, I want to play with my friends. So even creating the antecedent of a positive emotional experience, or a hopeful, imaginal kind of hopeful picture, that can often just be the antecedent for them to do something. So that's my quickie on that. But they're simple, but also, like Samantha said, they're so idiosyncratic and unique to the person. I think our work is pairing the science of the evidence with the art of really being a good therapist, or really being a good teacher. That's at the end of the day what's so important.
Awesome. And Sam, do you remember who is that the guy that talks about motivation in that class we're taking? Do you remember his name?
Oh,
As you think on it, there's research out, and this is about business workplace, but I thought it might be interesting to share with you all. Financial incentives, so if you think of an actual tangible reward, are proven to only be effective when it comes to physical labor. Whereas when you ask for more cognitive tasks, they actually disincentivize those behaviors. And
I got it, Casey. Daniel Pink.
So
Daniel Pink, he's wonderful. Yeah.
Daniel Pink.
I recommend, a lot of our conversation today talked about motivation, because that is exactly where mental health and executive functions interact. Is the lack of motivation starting there within the mental health realm, or is it because of the lack of skills? And so I do recommend you guys check out Daniel Pink. It is in the context of business and corporate world, but it's very insightful to think about what he talks about, and he has some great YouTube videos.
If you want to, I think there's a lot of parents and professionals. Carol Dweck has probably done the most seminal research about growth mindset, intrinsic motivation, and she has material out there that is certainly for professionals, but a lot that's really great for just anybody who wants to read. It's great, and it's in Martin Seligman and all those people. Lots of stuff, and Daniel Pink is amazing.
So I didn't intend for us to be giving you homework, but there's some other people for anyone here to go and check out. But thank you guys so much for your time. A special thank you to Dr. Flamenbaum and to Samantha Feinman. You guys are leaders in this field, and the insight that you share with anyone just really helps us all continue to do great work and make ourselves better to better help those, whether it be our children or whether it be the clients that we work with. So thank you so much for taking the time today. Everyone that's here today, I will be sending out a recording of today's webinar. Please share that link with anyone that you think may benefit from this. And if you would like to, you could always reach back out to me with that email if you have further questions, if you want to be connected either to New Frontiers or to Academics West or Therapy West. So again, thank you to the presenters, and I hope everyone has a great day and a great weekend. Is it this weekend that summer starts? Oh no, next Tuesday, or maybe it's Sunday. I'm forgetting. Either way, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. Have a good one, guys.
Bye.